Welcome back to INF People. Today we'll be discussing Daenerys Targaryen of A Song of Ice and Fire, or A Game of Thrones, and our second character profile. The question, is our beloved Dany an INFP or an INFJ? Now, I almost always see Daenerys typed as one of these two, INFP or INFJ, but I believe she is an INFP, and today we'll talk about why. There are tons of videos and articles about the differences and similarities between the INFP and INFJ. As far as type comparisons and type confusion go, these two seem to get mixed up the most. And as I'm sure you've heard before, if you've ever watched or read anything comparing these two types, although they have only one letter difference in preference, they actually do not share any of the same functions in common. We'll talk more about that soon. But first, let's talk a little bit about that perceiving and judging preference, especially as it relates to characters in stories. I've noticed a recurring problem when it comes to INFP characters being mistyped as INFJs. People tend to think of INFPs as idealistic individuals who spend most of their time dreaming the day away, lost in the world of their own imaginations. And that's not too far off, and it's much easier to pull that off in a book where you get the character's internal monologue than it is in a show or film, where you only see the character's actions. I've noticed that especially with INFPs who are one of the main characters, they tend to get typed or mistyped as INFJs because people see this character doing something and assume, oh, well, they must be a judging type since they're so proactive. But in stories, the characters, especially the main characters, have to do things. Otherwise, it wouldn't be much of a story, would it? I've even seen someone claim that the character Amelie from the movie of the same name was an INFP at the beginning of the movie, but once she started going out to help people, she was an INFJ, as if accepting the call to action removes the possibility of being an INFP. Protagonists have to do something, and there are plenty of INFP protagonists, as there are plenty of INFP authors, George R.R. Martin included, which is probably why, arguably, the two main protagonists of A Song of Ice and Fire, Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen, the ice and the fire, are both INFPs, just like Romeo and Juliet, William Shakespeare himself being an INFP. I think it may also be helpful to look at the character in question before the call to action. What were they like before their adventure began? What were they doing or not doing? In the case of Daenerys, she was a dreamy idealist who went with the flow and mostly adapted to what her brother Viserys was doing.
There's our bride-to-be. Look, a gift from Illyria. Touch it. Go on, feel the fabric. Isn't he a gracious host?
We've been his guests for over a year and he's never asked us for anything.
Well, Illyria's no fool. He knows I won't forget my friends when I come into my throne.
I will say that Dany does come off more like an INFP in the books than she does in the show, since we are not privy to what she is thinking in the show, and the two types appear very similar on the outside. Also, Emilia Clarke, the actress who portrays Dany, is most likely an ENFJ, the sister type of INFJs. And actors tend to bring a bit of their own personalities to their characters.
This character is the closest to yourself you've ever played.
Yeah, in that I'm not really like Khaleesi. But sorry.
Mother of dragons.
Yes. Hello. The truth. Thank you. That's more. I'm much closer to Lou, definitely.
Let's begin with the dominant function of the INFP and INFJ. Introverted feeling and introverted intuition, respectively. Again, this is easier to distinguish in the books where we get the characters' thoughts. Dany is constantly thinking about how she feels about other people and situations, what she likes and dislikes, her tastes and preferences. Her inner monologue shows her dominant introverted feeling function. She is never contemplating a long-term vision of her future as an introverted intuitive like Littlefinger or Marjorie might. Daenerys has a vague idea of wanting to seize the Iron Throne, but she never really spends time considering the ways she's going to attain that goal. She leaves the planning and scheming to her trusted advisors and focuses instead on her introverted feeling ideals. She even goes so far as to put those long-term goals on hold in order to stay true to her beliefs and focus her time and energy instead on uprooting the slave trade in Essos. In fact, Dany really has no idea how she will attain the Iron Throne. She simply allows herself to be guided by the people who believe in her. It's one of the reasons she is so lost when she sends Ser Jorah away. Her leadership style isn't just to impose her will, but to be the final decision maker once she's heard all the possibilities put forth by her advisors. Which brings us to Daenerys' second or auxiliary function, extroverted intuition. Extroverted intuition is a perceiving function that is all about possibilities, exploring new ideas, novelty. It allows INFPs to see things from multiple perspectives. When making a decision, Daenerys almost always stops to consider the different possibilities. She takes the opinions of her various advisors into consideration before finally making the decision for herself. The auxiliary function of the INFJ is extroverted feeling. Some people may watch the show and read Emilia Clarke's micro-expressions and assume that Daenerys uses extroverted feeling, but this is a case of the actor being unable to completely mask their own personality. Though in my opinion, Emilia Clarke does a good job of this most of the time. But Dany's decision-making process is introverted. She makes decisions based on her own personal beliefs. She gives little credence to social norms or what others deem appropriate, the way an extroverted feeler might. Jorah and others tried to appeal to a more extroverted feeling mindset when they told her that the slave trade was just the way of life in Essos, and she should let it go and focus on the endgame of becoming Queen of Westeros. But Daenerys' personal introverted feeling values would not allow her to ignore this cause she felt so strongly about, especially since she herself had been something of a slave to her brother, so she had a personal connection to the suffering of the enslaved and oppressed.
How can I rule 7 kingdoms if I can't control Slavers Bay? Why should anyone trust me? Why should anyone follow me?
You're a Targaryen. You're the mother of dragons.
I need to be more than that. I will not let those I have freed slide back into chains. I will not sail for Westeros.
What then?
I will do what queens do. I will rule.
In general, introverted feelers tend to identify with and root for the underdog. And in Daenerys' case, with her dragons, she had the power to do something about it. Normal INFPs don't have dragons, and often find it difficult, and maybe even reprehensible, to impose their own will on others. Which is why many INFPs spend so much time daydreaming about a better world. In Dany's case, she has the ability to create that better world. Hers is a story of what an INFP might do if given that sort of power. In a video by INTJ and INFP Coffee, it was said that Daenerys' dragons represent her inferior extroverted thinking function. I think this is a great way to look at it. INFPs often talk about having something inside them that comes to the surface when one of their ruling principles is violated. Then they become uncharacteristically inflexible and rigid, digging in their heels and refusing to budge from their position. This is when an INFP will impose their will, often in an outburst, lashing out at the supposed offenders. When Daenerys speaks the word Dracarys, we know that something has pushed her over the edge, and her extroverted thinking comes bubbling to the surface in the form of 3 fire-breathing dragons. Daenerys' Targaryen madness is manifesting itself as a weak extroverted thinking, attempting to dominate others and bend them to the will of her own introverted feeling values more and more. We don't see her desiring nice things as a way to compensate for inferior extroverted sensing the way an INFJ might.
I meant what I said. I'm not here to put men in chains. If that becomes an option, many will take it. I gave them a choice. They made it.
Your Grace, if you start beheading entire
I'm
families...
not beheading anyone.
Your Grace.
Lord Randall Tarly, Dickon Tarly. I, Daenerys of House Targaryen, first of my name, breaker of chains and mother of dragons, sentence you to die. Dracarys.
Dany's third or tertiary function is introverted sensing. We sometimes see it manifest itself in her pining after the vague memory of the Red Door, the place she thinks of as home. She is not overly sentimental about the past as someone who has introverted sensing as one of their top 2 functions might be, but she does have this one longing for the security of a home she hasn't had in so long. I can't recall if they mention this Red Door in the show, but it is something that Daenerys thinks about from time to time in the books.
I give him a queen, and he gives me an army.
I don't want to be his queen. I want to go home.
So do I. I want us both to go home, but they took it from us. So tell me, sweet sister, how do we go home?
I don't know.
We go home with an army. With Khal Drogo's army.
To conclude, I believe that Daenerys Targaryen is an INFP, especially in the books, though I can see why people watching the show might mistype her as an INFJ, but I still see her as more of an INFP in the show as well, but it's definitely debatable. Either way, she's my favorite character in the series and one of my favorite characters in general in any work of fiction. Thanks for watching, everyone, and tell me in the comments below, what do you think Daenerys Targaryen's type is? Until next time, this has been another character profile by INF People, and as always, peace and love.